Tonight at 10, there'll be no official inquiry into the most violent episode of the miners' strike at Orgreave 32 years ago. Campaigners insist that South Yorkshire Police lied about the events at Orgreave, but the Home Secretary says there is no justification for a public inquiry.
There were no miscarriages of justice. There were no deaths. There were no convictions.
There was anger at Westminster among campaigners who'd been expecting a very different outcome, and they promised to keep on campaigning.
Aren't we right in concluding that the establishment stitch-up that she has just announced today is nothing more than a nakedly political act?
We'll have the detail and reaction as the campaigners insist there are many unanswered questions. Also tonight, with 8 days to polling day in America, signs that the race is tightening in some of those key states. A report from the outskirts of Mosul as Iraqi special forces advance on the stronghold of the Islamic State group. Jail for 10 years for the lorry driver who killed a mother and 3 children when he crashed while using a mobile phone.
Anyone using a mobile whilst driving is guilty of dangerous driving. It only takes a second of distraction to kill someone.
Mark Carney says he will stay as Governor of the Bank of England until 2019 and not for the full term. And the art world of David Bowie, a glimpse at the private collection soon to be auctioned.
Here in the south, tougher laws and tougher sentences for people who use their mobiles at the wheel after this family is killed on the A34. And the top marks for a top teacher who's taken on the world and made maths fun.
Good evening. There will be no public inquiry into the violence between police and striking miners at Orgreave in 1984. The decision by the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, has provoked an angry response from campaigners who say it's an establishment stitch-up. They've consistently accused South Yorkshire Police of using excessive force at Orgreave and of telling lies. Dozens of miners were put on trial, but their cases collapsed. The Home Secretary said today that she'd made the decision because there had been no deaths or wrongful convictions. Our political editor, Laura Kunsberg, has this report.
Horses, batons, beatings. Orgreave was a battle between thousands of miners on strike and thousands of police. But there'll be no inquiry, no hunt for more truth, no new explanation.
Hey, minding my own business, that, mate.
One of the miners there on that day just can't understand why.
The things I saw that day, I wake up sweating sometimes in the night when my mind wanders onto it. And that's why I joined this campaign, to get justice, and there's been no justice today.
Why would an inquiry make such a difference to you, though?
Because we could say, we told you so. What we told you happened that day did happen.
95 miners were charged before their cases collapsed, and with suspicions of deliberate brutality and cover-up in the same police force as Hillsborough, campaigners believed an inquiry was coming.
Amber Rudd told all of you, these families here, that there would be an inquiry. The only question was, what kind?
She said her exact words were she had to decide what format it would take. It wasn't a question for us of whether or not it would happen. It was in what form it would take. She said the culture had changed now, that a light needed to be shone.
The Home Secretary denies any promise, but her decision met fury.
I have concluded that there is no case for either a statutory inquiry or an independent review. In this situation, in Orgreave, there were no miscarriages of justice. There were no deaths. There were no convictions. The Right Honourable Lady should be aware. Therefore, it doesn't merit the same level of status as a public inquiry as was required for Hillsborough.
Aren't we right in concluding that the establishment stitch-up that she has just announced today is nothing more than a nakedly political act?
This is an astonishing and frankly shameful decision by the government. The government have led those families up the garden path for the last 2 years.
Whilst public inquiries can, in some instances, be successful, too often they cost huge amounts of money, they take many years, and they don't even answer the question they're asked.
But Labour has vowed to keep pushing and keep promising an inquiry one day.
I'm astonished, absolutely astonished. When Theresa May was Home Secretary, she encouraged the families to write to her and ask for an inquiry. I think they may have just taken the view that if they just refuse to have it, it will all go away. Well, sadly for them, it won't. Look at the Hillsborough campaign, look at earlier campaigns on Birmingham and Guildford. The determination of people to get justice never goes away.
Yes, it's a straightforward game in politics to call for an inquiry. One minister said the hard thing is saying no. But in this case, the Home Office concluded an inquiry with its possible costs and complications just wasn't worth the while. But inquiries don't erase memories. Those there could hardly believe their eyes then. It's still hard to believe them now. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's go live to Orgreave tonight, and our correspondent Dan Johnson is there. Dan, we've heard already from some of the campaigners at Westminster today. What have the local community been saying to you there?
Well, I've heard tonight from one of the campaigners here who says this is not over, and the campaigners will have a meeting tomorrow to decide what their next move is. When the miners were chased up this field 32 years ago by police on horseback with truncheons and dogs, they felt they were the victims of an abuse of state power. They claimed that there was brutality, that there were wrongful arrests, that there was an attempt to frame them for serious offences. And we've heard the stories of retired police officers who say that they were told to use violence here, and that they were then told what to put in their statements to try to justify more serious charges. Now, I think the majority of police officers, all of them retired of course, will be pleased with this decision today. But for the miners, Orgreave and what happened here, this campaign became symbolic of everything that they have lost. It was a turning point in their strike. They lost that. Thousands of jobs went with it. Many would say trade union power has never been the same since. The coal mining industry has gone, and many feel the mining communities have been abandoned and left behind. But one thing is for sure, the communities around here, the former mining villages, won't easily forget the Battle of Orgreave.
Dan, thanks very much again. Dan Johnson there, correspondent in Orgreave in South Yorkshire. Now, President Obama has let it be known that he does not believe the FBI director, James Comey, is trying to influence the outcome of the presidential election. Democrats have strongly criticised Mr Comey after he announced that the FBI was investigating more material that might relate to Hillary Clinton's use of unofficial emails while she was Secretary of State. But as our North America editor John Soper reports now, the latest allegations seem to have given Donald Trump's campaign a new energy with just 8 days to go.
Hillary Clinton was in Cleveland today trying to look relaxed in a soul food cafe, but hers is a troubled soul after the intervention of the FBI last Friday when the director announced his new investigation. At a rally, she gave vent to her frustration.
Why in the world the FBI would decide to jump into an election with no evidence of any wrongdoing with just days to go? I'm not making excuses. I've said it was a mistake and I regret it, and now they apparently want to look at emails of one of my staffers. And I am sure they will reach the same conclusion they did when they looked at my emails for the last year. There is no case here.
It won't change the mind of her staunch supporters lining up to see her, but it might affect independence. The White House wouldn't condemn what the FBI did, but listen to this very nuanced comment from the president's spokesman about how the Department of Justice should behave this close to an election.
It's important in the mind of the president that those authorities are tempered by an adherence to long-standing tradition, and the president believes that it's important for those norms and traditions and guidelines to be followed.
And why would you stress that unless you think they might have breached conventional norms? While in office, Hillary Clinton relied on a private email account on her own server, sending thousands of messages, both personal and government-related. The FBI said that was negligent, but didn't press charges. Now, in a separate case involving the estranged husband of one of her close aides, more emails have come to light, and the FBI has reopened its investigation. But that in itself is proving controversial. It's not normal for the FBI to comment on an ongoing investigation. And some Democrats now say that the director, James Comey, may have himself broken the law, which prevents federal law enforcement officers from seeking to influence the outcome of an election. Tonight is the night of carved pumpkins as Americans prepare to celebrate Halloween. But this evening it's Hillary Clinton who feels she's been tricked, while the FBI investigation has given Donald Trump his biggest treat.
The Trump campaign has never been known for its calm or serenity, but add to the raucousness a sense of euphoria at the moment, because these people here and the Trump campaign believe that the FBI's intervention could be a game changer.
I think more people are going to come over to the Trump train.
The impact should be the independents. I think they kind of go back and forth depending on what the scandal is of the moment.
I have to give the FBI credit. That was so bad what happened originally, and it took guts for Director Comey to make the move that he made in light of the kind of opposition he had, where they're trying to protect her from criminal prosecution.
It's too soon to say what impact the FBI intervention will have. But listen to Donald Trump. All the talk last week of this being a rigged election has gone. He has fresh belief that he can and will win.
Well, it's a very noisy hall here in Detroit where Donald Trump has just finished speaking. The Department of Justice in the past few moments have issued a statement to Congress saying they will work with the FBI as closely as possible, that they will give it all resources and will work as judiciously as possible. What we don't know is whether we'll get any kind of verdict before or after the election. But one very important footnote to add, Hugh, is that the Democrats are awaiting the next set of polls with extreme anxiety, just as the Trump camp are looking forward to them. Back to you.
John, thanks very much. John Sopel there at that rally in Detroit with the latest on the campaign. And a quick reminder from me, you can find out the latest in the race for the White House. Go to bbc.co.uk/US 2016 and there you'll see John's material and his blogs and all our colleagues too, and the backgrounds to lots of the key states and the state of the campaign. Now, Mark Carney has announced that he will stay in post as Governor of the Bank of England until the end of June 2019. Mr Carney, who met the Prime Minister Theresa May at Number 10 today, had been facing calls from some prominent Conservatives for him to stand down following his warnings about the potential impact of Brexit. Mr Carney's departure in 2019 is 1 year beyond his current term, but means he will not be staying on for the full 8-year term. Let's discuss this with our business editor, Simon Jack. Simon, a word then first about the decision and the way it was made.
Well, I think the first important thing to say is it was his decision. Remember, he arrived as a sort of surprise superstar foreign signing in football terms that George Osborne appointed. And at first, everyone thought he was great. He seemed to charm just about everyone. But then as the referendum approached, which hadn't been called when he was first hired, as the referendum approached, he angered some. People thought that he was getting too political by half by some of his warnings about an economic shock that might happen. They thought he was overstepping his brief. And at that point, people thought that, he's warned that the pound would fall. He was right about that. He warned there might be an economic shock. That hasn't materialised yet. And then he cut interest rates just after the referendum, which Theresa May veiledly criticised in her conference speech, saying that hurt savers. So a lot of people thinking some test exchanges between some of the Brexiteers and him, he might say, you know what, I'll see out my 5-year term to the end of 2018 and that's it, this is too political for me.
Let's talk about the timing. So, as I say, it's the end of June 2019. What does that mean in terms of that Brexit timetable?
Well, crucially, if we trigger Article 50 by the end of March 2017, that takes us to March 2019. So it sees him through. He will see it through to the end of that particular process. Now, whether you like him or loathe him, most people think that losing your central bank chief in the middle of a process as momentous as that is not ideal. So he's clearly decided that, you know, the UK needs him for one more year. After Theresa May backed him, saying he was absolutely the right man for the job, he says he's going to stay on. His family is still going to Canada 2018. He's saying, I've got unfinished business here. I'm going to stick around till 2019.
OK, Simon, once again, thanks very much. Simon Jack there for us, our business editor. Now, Iraqi special forces trying to drive so-called Islamic State from its stronghold in the city of Mosul have advanced to the eastern outskirts of the city. The campaign, which is now in its third week, involves hundreds of troops in heavily armoured vehicles, all supported by US-led coalition airstrikes. Our international correspondent Ian Pannell and cameraman Darren Conway are travelling with the Iraqi special forces, and they sent us this report.
This battle isn't just for one city, but an entire nation. Iraq is a country shattered and shot by years of war. Many expected these troops to pause, to wait for other fighters on other fronts. But that's not what happened today. As we joined Iraqi counter-terrorism forces moving to the last town between them and so-called Islamic State.
But the armoured column, as you can see, has now moved out into the desert in what they call a flanking manoeuvre. In other words, just going round the town of Bezwaya, which they're trying to get to. And we're in the lead vehicles here with the commander of counter-terrorism forces. Over there is the town of Bezwaya, where they're going to try and get to. And if they manage to get through that, then they manage to move on even further towards their main target.
Over the weekend, these men were attacked by the militants. In the confusion of battle, they lost more than a dozen of their comrades. So now this is personal. Taking the fight back to ISIS. And the closer they get, the fiercer the resistance. After more than 2 years, it feels as though this conflict is moving into a decisive phase.
The counter-terrorism unit have just advanced into this area. They've just opened attack on what they think are IS positions. We're just being told to get back into the vehicles. They've got another unit coming from the other side of the town. There's also fighter jets overhead trying to give them cover. As you would expect, it's a very confused and very dangerous situation.
Many thought the town was abandoned to the fighters. But from behind closed doors, on walls and along alleyways, dozens of terrified families emerged. They'd been trapped between warring parties here for years, desperate for help, needing relief.
I'm very happy. We liberated the land and the people.
And finally, there, on the horizon, less than a mile away, is the heart of the self-declared caliphate of Islamic State.
We are very, very close to Mosul. We've run out of time today. But tomorrow, the Iraqi people and the world will celebrate its liberation.
The people who live here are Shabak, an ethnic group who've suffered under many oppressors.
Thank God we survived Daesh. We have nothing. No food, no water. We had such a bad life. The women were told, don't go out. Don't go out or we will behead you.
They're also a reminder of the sectarian problems here. If they're ever to live in peace, this campaign also needs a plan for what comes after the war. As more families are made homeless, more lives lost. And still, the real battle is yet to come. Ian Pannell, BBC News, just outside Mosul.
A lorry driver has been jailed for 10 years for killing a mother and 3 children because he was looking at his mobile phone while travelling at 50 miles an hour. The judge said that Thomas Croker might as well have had his eyes closed when he crashed into traffic in Berkshire in August. The family said that the 10-year sentence was insufficient for a crime which they said had caused so much suffering and destruction. As our correspondent Duncan Kennedy tells us.
The precious moments of a family life that no longer exists. Here, brothers Ethan and Josh and their sister Amy, the 3 children killed in this horrific crash. They died together with their mother Tracy at the end of what had been a family holiday. They were killed by this man, Tomasz Croker, seen here on his mobile phone moments before the crash. Cameras in his lorry show him scrolling through his music for up to 45 seconds before he hit a queue of stationary traffic. Croker can be seen here on the left in the hooded top moments after the crash. Tracy's partner Mark had been behind her car in the Silver Estate on the right and had shunted her vehicle under the blue lorry.
We pulled up behind some lorries, just crawling along. Everyone slowed all down and then that was it. Bang. Then I looked down at this car and went, oh my God, I couldn't believe it.
The crash happened last August on the A34 in Berkshire. The judge said it was like the lorry driver, Tomasz Croker, had been driving with his eyes closed. The birth mother of 11-year-old Amy, one of the 4 who died, said using mobile phones whilst driving had devastating consequences.
Mr. Croker's use of his mobile phone whilst driving turned his lorry into a lethal weapon. It only takes a second of distraction to kill someone, destroying your life, your family's lives, and those of your victim and their family.
The law in this area is clear. It's illegal to use mobile phones whilst driving or at traffic lights or whilst queuing. But you can use them if parked or making a 999 emergency call. Hands-free sets are also allowed, but if police see you distracted, they can stop and penalise you. The RAC said today that mobile phones played a part in more than 400 accidents last year, in which 22 people died. The government has already announced that it plans to double the penalties for using a mobile phone. In future, motorists could face a £200 fine and 6 points on their licence. Tomasz Croker was today jailed for a total of 10 years after he admitted dangerous driving. His victims' families say the deaths could have been avoided and has left them bereft. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, in Reading.
The jockeys Jim Crowley and Freddie Tilitsky have been taken to hospital with suspected spinal injuries after 4 horses fell during a race at Kempton in Surrey. The horses were not reported to be seriously injured. Fellow riders Steve Brown and Ted Durkin also fell, but they were able to walk off the course. The Labour MP Keith Vaz has been elected to the Justice Select Committee almost 8 weeks after he was forced to step down as chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. Mr Vaz left his position on the Home Affairs Committee after newspaper allegations that he'd paid for the services of a male escort. A man has been jailed for life for murdering a waiter 18 years ago in North Lanarkshire after standing trial for a second time. Ronnie Coulter was originally cleared of stabbing Surjit Singh Chokar, who was returning from work at an Indian restaurant in Wishaw. But the Crown was given permission to bring a second prosecution over his killing, following changes to the laws in Scotland in 2011. Officials in Glasgow have approved in principle a controversial plan to set up the UK's first so-called consumption rooms, where drug addicts can inject heroin and also smoke the drug under supervision. The scheme aims to address the problems caused by an estimated 500 users who inject on the streets of Glasgow. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan has the story.
We came to this wasteland to see the remnants of many lives gone wrong. The necessary tools of a heroin addiction strewn far and wide. Up to 500 people inject heroin in public in Glasgow. Within minutes, we'd been joined by 2 of them. They'd come for their first hit of the day. 2 homeless 40-something men. Their anticipation palpable.
This is gold dust.
Moments later, I watched as the heroin kicked in.
Are you alright? F***ing hope so.
With such problems, plans are afoot to open the UK's first consumption centre, a clinic where addicts can safely take their drugs.
Safe injecting rooms would save a lot of lives. Coming to places like this, as you can see, is certainly not a safe place to be. I mean, you come in here at night time, there's no guarantee you're going to walk back out.
Drug use is a public health problem. Drug-related deaths are at record levels across Britain, while experts said a spike in new HIV infections in Glasgow last year was mainly due to heroin users sharing needles. But it's also an issue of public safety. This neighbourhood has had to live with the dangers of used needles being discarded.
There was a girl stays up here as well, and she went to put her baby in the pram, and there was needles in the kid's pram.
There was a needle in the kid's pram?
No needles in the kid's pram. That's how bad it is.
This is a safe consumption room in Denmark. Dozens operate worldwide. Needles are clean and kept on site, protecting both users and the public. Glasgow's drug services are highly regarded, but officials believe more is needed to help street users. One option would see addicts bring their own drugs to the clinic and hopefully engage with other services.
We know that a lot of people that are in this situation are homeless, have mental and physical health problems, so it's not just teaching them about how to use drugs.
This pharmacy highlights the drug problem. It is a separate entrance for users of methadone, a heroin substitute. But opening consumption rooms will not reduce demand, argue some experts.
It's effectively legalising drugs and providing people with easier access to illegal drugs. It's promoted, I think, by people who in many instances have given up on the idea of recovery, and their most convincing or persuasive suggestion is to enable people to use illegal drugs more safely. That is not how Scotland should be tackling its drug problem.
Heroin addiction has ravaged the lives of many in Glasgow as elsewhere. Dealing with that legacy has now put the city at the forefront of Britain's drugs policy. Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Glasgow.
Now, hundreds of works of art from David Bowie's personal collection are to go on display at Sotheby's in London from tomorrow, ahead of an auction in just a few weeks' time. Bowie was actively involved in art throughout his career, as an artist himself, as a writer, as a patron and a collector. The exhibition includes work from some of the 20th century's most influential artists. Our art editor, Will Gompertz, has had an exclusive preview.
David Bowie made this painting with Damien Hirst, who described the singer as childish and childlike and brilliant fun to spin with. It is one of the star attractions in the sale, which accounts for well over 50% of the late pop star's entire collection of art.
I'm not a buyer of things. I think the only thing that I buy, addictively and obsessively probably, is art.
The sale is extensive in both content and style. There's pop art, German expressionism, British modernism, a Tintoretto, some Picasso pottery, and a chess set made by Man Ray.
So, Beth, 350 works. What do they tell us about the collector?
Well, they tell us an awful lot about David's way of thinking, how he wanted to understand the world, a very particular world, his recent history. So a lot of the works in the collection are modern British painting and sculpture. And of course, you know, he was a baby boomer, he was a post-war baby boomer. A lot of the art was made around that period, or the period building up to that moment. So David used the collection to understand his place in the world.
It is largely a mid-20th century take on British life of city living, landscapes and coastal scenes, all of which might seem quite conservative for a man with a reputation as an avant-garde performer. He acquired much of it in the mid-90s with the help of this art advisor.
What was he like to work with?
He was the most remarkable man to work with, and he was deeply invested in what he was doing. His focus was exhausting and all-encompassing, and when he was on the subject of buying modern British pictures, he was incredibly intense, and I think you see the intensity with some of the selections in the collection.
OK, but which one of those on sale was his favourite?
He very famously talked about the hour back, and that's something that he lived with. And David talked about how this work could change the way he felt in the morning as he passed it. If he was feeling joyous that morning, he said, hell yes, I want to sound like that painting looks.
Several of these poppy postmodern pieces from Bowie's collection are priced in the low hundreds of pounds. Tantalising for some maybe, but then that's the auction estimate before the bidding starts. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
Well, there'll be a little more on the US elections just coming up on Newsnight. Here's Evan.
Whether it is Trump or Clinton that wins next week, they will be president of a country that is divided and sometimes angry. We'll be hearing how hard it'll be for either to put the United back into the United States. Join me now on BBC Two, 11 p.m. in Scotland.
That's Newsnight with Evan here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.